Okay, we're entering part 5 on this, and we just got through discussing the sun and how its sacred number 432 hooks up to all kinds of things, including the Great Pyramid, which we'll go into here shortly. Now let's look at another one. You all know what this is. This is the moon. Can you see the rabbit that's in the moon? It's facing to the left, hunched over. Can you see the man in the moon? Well, the man in the moon is Kingu from the ancient Sumerians, and they said they killed him and mixed his blood in and made us like a golem spell where they turned a clay statue into a man. At least that's what the Bible says. Let's look at these connections going with the moon and its numbers too.
All right, what are we looking at here? Anybody recognize that? Look familiar?
Easily.
The moon has a radius of 1,080 miles, which gives it a diameter of 2,160. Remember
Notice that the years of the Platonic month over here on the left too, that's still left up there from the last time we were going through this. In 108 we talked about, well, we're around Halloween right now, so might as well mention 108. That has to do with the atomic weight of silver somehow magically, but then silver is the bane of werewolves, which kick off because of the full moon. See how this all goes together? Even though it's witchcrafty da-da-da or whatever you want to think about it, they were using real math and all kinds of things to figure all these things out that most people have no clue of. Again, Halloween has been turned into something where they tell you that it's just a way for the candy companies to turn into some blah blah blah. When you come to find out, it goes back into the end of the last ice age, and it looks like it's triggered off of the Younger Dryas event. That's the reason they call those witches' brooms that are flying in the sky out there, because of right around the end of October, November 1st and 2nd, which people all over the world used as this Day of the Dead in some way. And that's what we have for Halloween still left over. And whether or not it happened exactly then is a good question. But one thing's for sure, from the Ancient of Days, they took and used that as a reminder of this great catastrophe that had happened that probably led to the idea of this Day of the Dead, because there was a great spike downward in humanity during this time. Anyhow, happy Halloween though, with all the good things that go along with it too, of course.
said that 1,080 or 108, and it's double. 2160 was a lunar number. See, this is a clue to you now. There are several references, for example, in the Sumerian tradition describing the ark built by Sisyphus, which is being described as a cube. It makes no sense. You think, what kind of a ship is it that would be described as a cube? You know, that wouldn't be very seaworthy, a cube.
No, not really. Now, I have another video done by Professor Emeritus at the British Museum, who's over Assyriology, which contains Sumeriology and everything else. And this guy, who also looks kind of like Carlson does here, looks like somebody from the ancient Greek world or something, and he's got all white hair and a long beard. He did a thing where they thought he was Noah actually in doing it, but he showed that in the Sumerians they had told exactly how big this boat was, and so they actually replicated it. Then whenever they started to do it, they said, we can't do it, but how about 3/4 scale or something? And of course, so it's a shadow of its former self whenever you see it though. That thing is huge, but it was just supposed to hold Zithra. Zithris was what he calls him here, but there are many other names like Utnapishtim and so on, and we know him as Noah. But he was originally took 2 of every family of the animals that they had around there, so they could replenish it, and it was a local flood and a local story. If you took out the line and over the hills Then the story tells you that it only gets about 18 cubits deep. That's in Sumeria where they're talking about the flood, the whole thing that went with that. Therefore, that's all that really happened there. So it makes you wonder, what was the flippant thing where they end up in the Caucasus Mountain area and stuff again? Well, people will believe that the people from the Zagros Mountains to the east of the Sumerians, when this happened to them, they came in and took over. Really was the Akkadians on their behalf, and they had these people, and the Akkadians had this thing whenever they took over people, they pushed them to a different place that was unknown to them, and they realized that gave them better control over them. Well, they flipped them over into Anatolia is what ended up happening, which was really a place from long, long ago. But again, the moon has these numbers attached to it. This 108 with this diameter, just like the sun has a diameter of 432,000 miles, so on. So we're measuring all kinds of things here. And the amazing thing was, whenever they put these numbers attached to it, at the very earliest of writings, they appeared to have it before that. They're pretty darn close, along with the size of the Earth, which we'll talk about shortly.
Right? But it's not referring to an actual ship as we think of it. It's referring to the cubing of the sphere. And in this case, the sphere that it's referring to is the moon, which...
And back to what I was saying, Irving Finkel was the man that looks kind of like Noah or whatever that did all this. And he found out that easily he understood the concept that it wasn't a square, even though they're describing the square, it's squaring the circle, and that gives you an arc about so big. Yeah. And so it was a coracle type of ship, just a round ship that would easily, that's a good ship. It's like a live ship or whatever. It's not clean to go through the water and have a sail on it or anything like that. And so it really looks more like that side version that you always saw when you were a kid, where they got a giraffe poking out and so on. That really has more of a direct representation to it than this idea we get, or the movie from not too many years ago where they tried to put all this out and there's giant rock golems and all things going on. But the ark too, that's a safe place or a safe haven. Let's listen to him speak about that.
Which was symbolically considered to be an ark to many of the ancient cultures that believed that the earth was periodically destroyed by great catastrophes. So we have the number 1,000.
So Randall has spoken a few different times about his belief that we might have made it to the moon before, at least. Not that he wants to give it too much other than that, but I even made the comment, you know, here's a philosophical idea on it, that whenever people take off, if we could ever get up and bounce off the planets a couple of times and get it whipping and go around 7, 8/10 the speed of light, if we did that for a period of years and then come back, it would be a large variety in time of difference between the two that are there. It wouldn't be the same thing. And in fact, wouldn't it be amazing with all these gray aliens they talk about and so on, if that's not us coming back to check upon ourselves? And there was a period there where we got almost wiped off the earth and there's no remnants of it ever before. I don't see enough to do that. That's like that Sitchin thing where he says, well, the Baalbek thing is, there's no reason to have it that big, so it must be a rocket ship. Not giving these people an advancement to the point, if they're aliens coming down supposedly, that they would have had something that doesn't need all of that. They don't have to go off of simple fuels and so on. Now, if they got trapped on our planet and had to make it back off, you might actually have to do something along that line and set up a whole thing that would be different than what you had. But hopefully you could, lost in space, fix your ship, get a little more dilithium crystals or whatever it takes, and figure out your own thing. Let's continue.
1,080, we have the number 2160. And then we have the Earth. Yeah, that's the Earth. And
I love to hear him talk, but let's just try to cut through this real quick. You see the equator line on it, and we got a north to south. We are real lucky that we have a 26-mile bulge where it's wider in the middle than it is from the top to bottom. In fact, the idea is here that we really have about about a 7,900 polar radius, but then the radius that's around the equator is 7926, or we have 26.6 miles, almost 27, because I believe the 7,900, depending on a few factors here, is really 7899. So just round it off or whatever, and if we rounded that off one and rounded off the other, it's around 26 miles difference in these poles. Well, that'll throw everything off. Well, how about if you use math enough to end up getting the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, getting a middle idea on the idea of, you see these dotted lines that are going on over here, which he's going to show now, Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer. If you went across that, 7920, a sphere with the same surface area as the Earth, what would it be if it was the size that we're talking about? 7920. So this is Earth's number, one of Earth's numbers. So we've talked about the moon's number, the sun's number, Earth's number. We aren't going to go into all the planets and everything, and they're separate numbers, but there are ones that go with that make hex designs and so on like that. And ironically, there on Jupiter itself, there is on its crown, or on its top of it, there's a hex-shaped surface. It also emits a sound, and each planet has its own hum, if you will. But I guess that would be more in the music thing, whenever you break it into a bunch of ways, because music's all hooked up to this too. So I was trying to talk about before, 432 is also the measure of A on a guitar. And when you have a 6-string guitar, you know, rock and roll and everything, the second string from the top, the low one is dun dun dun, the second one is dun. So that's A. Well, in the modern day, we've moved it A to 440. But in reality, in all of the ancients, to go with everything and to make it all work, and every note up the scale that we have, which are all named after people of ancient Anatolia and Greeks and so on like that, Phrygian, Locrian, Dorian. But in that effect, it's all sacred geometry too. It deserves its own video and stuff, and I thought I might get it in and even show you some things with a guitar, to show you the declamations of things and some simplistic effects ideas or whatever off of it, and the circle of fifths and concepts like that. But that's for another video. Let's continue.
So forth. When they're talking in round numbers about the radius of the diameter of the Earth, these are the numbers they use: 7920 and 3960.
That's radius and diameter.
Now, what I've got here is evidence for advanced geodetic knowledge in archaic times. What is geodesy or geodetic knowledge? Geodesy is the determination of the size and the shape of the Earth. Early in the 19th century, such knowledge was acquired by extensive land surveying and triangulating over large tracts of the Earth's surface. Since the
And so they were able to get an idea of the radius of the Earth. And what's crazy is, you look back at the ancient Greeks, and whenever they figured it out, because of there being no shadow in a well in Syene, and that being 800 miles away, and there they have a definitive shadow. It's just a little bit, but it's still a shadow, even though that stick's plumbed up full. So what's the difference of that? Well, in that they were able to figure out the extent that the sun goes south and north in relation to ourselves. It's not really doing this, and we're not doing it either. It's all part of a wobble of the seasons, right? But in doing so, they were able to figure it out, and it was only a few miles off. It's like 500 miles off. And if you figure out the whole circumference of the Earth and everything, and don't have that bulge idea figured into it, he was actually a whole lot closer. In fact, here in a minute, we're going to get into the idea of how close they were, and we're going to talk about the Great Pyramid. And again, if it goes to another part in this, in the middle of this fireworks, it'll be in your top left-hand corner as usual.
1970s, orbital satellites have provided the most accurate picture of the Earth's exact size and mass distribution. Any advanced comprehension of the larger picture of our planet as a suitable abode for the evolution of higher life requires knowledge of its size and shape.
That's a pretty important concept and sentence right there. But let's continue. Just absorb it for a second.
The total mass, of course, determines g, the gravitational constant. The equatorial bulge is an integral component of the forces acting to impose rotation and orbital stability on Earth as it wheels about the sun.
Now, earlier he just showed how it spins, and he took the globe in his hand and he goes, you know, it's spinning around per day, but also we're going all the way around for a year. But then there's this wobble thing going on, and we went through all of that. This is more of a lawyer or scientific speak of it, saying the exact statement right there, and how that bulge that we do have, due to the fact that Earth, whenever it was cooling, was spinning around fast enough that it caused a little bit of a bulge, and then added to that bulge, swinging on it like an extra pendulum, giving it a kick in, is the bulge of water that the moon creates a bulge in, which we consider the tides, which it's really following around the moon.
The relevance of these two basic factors to the evolution of life cannot be underestimated. Ancient master builders understood Earth's fundamental geodetic parameters on a level not equaled until the advent of modern satellite surveys.
In fact, we lost this concept, and it's not but rarely spoken of. And I wonder if in architecture class or anything they start talking about sacred geometry and so on like that, and you're able to even get a nick of an idea of all the stuff we're talking about today. Because what is this taught in? What class is this taught in, and so on? Well, it's sacred geometry, but really you have to be initiated into one of those secret societies that'll tell you things like this, where you know some things that other people don't, and all the things that go with that, and so on.
How do we know that? Well, probably the most salient means we have of knowing that is the Great Pyramid of Cheops itself. And there's been lots and lots of speculation about what the form or what the function of the Great Pyramid was. Some of it to me is pretty out there. Some of it I think is pretty abstract and speculative.
Abstract and speculative, and I agree. And the thing that kind of missed me a little bit is everybody goes, man, they were so advanced, it must have been aliens. Like they can't give the Caucasian Egyptians that came up with all this stuff, just like they did in Sumer, making other pyramids too. So what if they're a little different, variation on a theme? Same concept, same everything, but then out of nowhere they pull out the largest structure man-made on Earth, all the way up until, what was it, the 1500s and stuff, whenever they finally built a cathedral that was a little taller. And it was really just because of the little spire on top that they put, which eventually fell off, so it lost that anyhow. Pretty crazy. But let's look at how the Great Pyramid ends up entrapping ideas of the size of the Earth and geodesy, as he's speaking of. You see these three little step pyramids here that are smoothed off, and the pyramid's done that way, but you can still see on the top of it here that smoothed off point.
What I've always thought does make the most sense and has the greatest credibility is the pyramid is essentially a model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, and I'll show you how here. The thing you have to understand when you're looking at the measurement of the Earth in terms of its size and shape is that we have lines. Everybody knows latitude and longitude. Latitude is measured north and south of the equator. Longitude is the measure around this way.
So it's that grid that everybody knows about. But if you've ever really looked into it, they're a little stretched out. And the reason for that stretch is because of that bulge that we're talking about here. Otherwise, it'd be a perfect ball. So he's going to describe how, you know, the rings around the Earth would go and things like that. This might be a part I could skip a little, but I think all this is important.
Parallels are lines that run that parallel to the equator. And traveling along one of the parallels, we would be displacing ourselves longitudinally. But parallels actually measure, you can see that this parallel here, this is probably the Arctic Circle. It looks to me like about 66.5 degrees north. So it is parallel to the equator, right? So depending on what parallel you are, every line of latitude, north and south, has a corresponding parallel. And you know that from the equator to the North Pole is going to be 90 degrees. And likewise from the equator to the South Pole is going to be 90 degrees of arc. Then in turn we have meridian lines, which are lines that run north-south, but actually measure distances east and west. So
this is like the stripes around a pumpkin, if you will, that go from top to bottom and everything. And these are measuring a distance too, even though it seems like it's looking another way. And so stretched out on that grid, you have two differences that you're looking at. He's going to describe
that if you traveled from one meridian to the next to another meridian, you would have traveled from east to west. Every point on the surface of the earth has a local meridian. We have a local meridian here. And it's basically the way you would find it is if you walked out here, I believe this is generally south, isn't it, this way? So if we went out here and we looked exact.
You can do this wherever you are, so you find out what exactly south is and north is, faced east, and then make an arch on the top, and this will show you your local meridian, or that line running around. And if you were to watch the constellations go through their phases, it's that line and what tilt we are.
Exactly south and exactly north, and then the zenith overhead, the point 90 degrees up from a flat horizon. We struck an arc from the south point through the zenith point to the North Pole. That arc would be our local meridian. And as the Earth turns under that local meridian, we measure all astronomical motion relative to our point on the surface of the Earth with respect to that local meridian. Now, you'll notice.
So this is what the ancient astronomers used to kind of lock themselves in, by the way, and figure out where their local meridian was. Now, the local meridian changes depending on where you're at. And so it gets to be a difference between things, but he's going to show you that the ancients even showed you that they knew that was going on too.
That as you go through the parallels form virtually perfect circles. The meridian lines, on the other hand, are not circles because of the flattening of the Earth. Because of the expansion of the equator, if you draw a line around it this way, and cut the Earth this way, it is not going to be a circle. If you cut it this way, it will be a circle. Okay.
It's an oblate spheroid. It's just a little wider in the middle. The ancients, whenever they figured this out and were trying to figure out the differentials of it, came up with the idea that it looked like a pear. But then other people that have now looked into it said those people were measuring the height of the bulge of water of high tide and so on, and then